Today the sermon is entitled, Where Do I Come From? Where do I come from? I'd like to invite you to bow your heads for a word of prayer as we begin. Father in heaven, we thank you for the opportunity we have to open your word, to read and study and meditate on it together. Bless us and speak through your word, I pray in Christ's name. Amen. Where do I come from? Where do you come from? Is a common question that we get asked as we're just going about our everyday business. You'll meet someone, and sooner or later in the process of communication, one of you will ask the other the question, where do you come from? Now that question can mean several different things. It could mean, where do you live? It could mean, what country were you born in? It could mean, where do your parents come from? It can mean a lot of different things. And those of you or those of us who have parents or you yourself have moved country during your lifetime, that question can mean lots of things. Now, I was born and raised in England. However, neither of my parents are English. And so sometimes when I was growing up, I would just, let me see if this works. No, it's not working. Sometimes when I was, other way. Sometimes when I was growing up, or even now, I like to kind of play around and have fun with people. Because people will come to me when I'm in England. Now, some of you may relate in your different contexts, you may relate to this. I don't know. And they'll say to me, as we're talking, where are you from? And I'll say, now this actually happens more often when I'm not in England, especially in America. Because, anyway, they need to read more. It often happens and they say, so where are you from? And I'll say, I'm from England. Now I know what they're thinking, but they don't want to say it. What they're thinking is, you don't look English. You don't look like King Charles. You don't look like what I think an English person looks like. So they say, but where are you really from? And I look back and I say, oh, from England. That's where I live. I was born and raised there. Now I know what but where are you really from? Now I know what they're trying to get to. They really want to know what my ethnic heritage is. But they don't actually want to say it because they don't know how to say it, and anyway. And some of you have had those questions asked you in different places, where you're from. Oh, I'm from Australia. Huh? Really? Yeah, I'm from Australia. Where about? And the questions go on and on and on, and sometimes you want to help the person out, and sometimes you're just tired of it and you don't help the person out. If you really want to know where I'm from, though, that's my father there, and that's my mother, and that's my wife's father, and my wife's mother, and that's my wife's grandma there on the far right. My father is from a little island in the Indian Ocean called Mauritius, but he's of Indian background. My mother is from a little island in the Atlantic Ocean called Iceland. And there are very few of us in the world of that combination. The Union president here in Australia, Terry Johnson, is actually half Icelandic and half Mauritian as well, and we share that in common. Then my wife has a different ethnic makeup, a different heritage. My wife, that's her mother there, and then her grandma, who's 106 now and still alive well. And then in the middle is her father. Now, my wife's heritage is interesting. So Enoch is actually quarter. So I would always say I'm half Icelandic and half Mauritian. But Enoch, when he grows up, will have to say he's a quarter Icelandic, he's a quarter Mauritian, he's a quarter Japanese, and he's a quarter, white American. Now, that's my wife's family there, and that picture was taken probably, I don't know, 5, 6, 7, 8 years ago. And that was at her grandma's 100th birthday. Now she's 106 and still going strong. We may have a 110th birthday one of these days, who knows. Now, my wife is half Japanese and half white American. Now, the sermon is entitled, Where Do I Come From? Because where you come from and your background plays a part, it needs to play a part in your identity and who you are today. It plays a part in who you are. Where you come from inevitably plays a role in your identity today. Now, this is true when it comes to our ethnic identity. I don't know what countries are represented here. But whatever countries are represented here, those countries and those cultures and those people groups, they play a part in you individually today. Who you are as a person, where you come from plays a part in who you are. Now my wife, there's her family there. Now interesting. You'll see there on the screen, there's my wife and me at our wedding 10 years ago this year. There's her grandma in the blue dress. And there's her mother and her mother's brothers and sisters in the picture. Now, my wife is half Japanese. Her mother obviously is full Japanese. There. They were all born in the early 1950s. My wife's name is Aiko, and her sister's name is Midori. They are both good Japanese names. I think there's a Princess Midori or Aiko or something in Japan. But interestingly, they're both given Japanese names. Here's an interesting family, whatever. My wife's mum is called Joan. Then the uncles are called Glenn, Mark, and Dean. My wife is Aiko. Her sister is Midori. Her mother, Joan, Glenn, Dean, Mark. Why do they have American names? And the kids have Japanese names? Why do you think? Knowing your background and where you come from, it plays a part in understanding who you are and why these decisions happen. In 1941, the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor. At that time, California had a huge concentration of Japanese. My wife's grandma's mother's family, my wife's half Japanese, her mother's Japanese, her grandma's Japanese. It's not until you go back to her great-grandparents that they moved over from Japan to America in the 1890s. So even my wife's grandma, born in America, American citizen, etc., etc. But in 1941, when the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor, the Americans, some bad things happened. Prior to the bombing of Pearl Harbor, actually, they had this thing that was the Munson Report. Some of you may know about this, some of you may not. It was a Munson Report delivered by President Roosevelt, where he went to the West Coast to survey the Japanese populations to see if, amongst the Japanese, there was a threat of an uprising. And the Munson Report declared that amongst the Japanese, there was no threat of any insurrection, and they were incredibly loyal to the United States of America. This report, though, at the time was suppressed. It was suppressed, the Munson Report. The report was ignored and kept secret by the government. Basically, it said there was no military action needed against the Japanese of America. But when Pearl Harbor was bombed on the 7th of December, 1941, it kickstarted a series of events that is a shameful blot on American history. A week later, this congressman says, I think we should catch every Japanese in America, Alaska, Hawaii, and put them where? In concentration camps. Let's get rid of them now. Henry Leclermore says, I am for the immediate removal of every Japanese on the West Coast to a point deep in the interior, he said. I don't mean a nice part. He said, herd them up, pack them up, put them in the Badlands. Personally, I hate the Japanese and every one of them. 1941, the United States of America. While they're fighting the enemy overseas, they created one at home. And then on 1942, February the 19th, F.D. Roosevelt said, I hereby authorize and direct the Secretary of the War and the military commanders to prescribe military areas in such places and to such extent as he or her may appropriate military commander may determine from which all persons. Basically, he authorized all of these Japanese to be removed from the West Coast to a place deep in the interior. This person said Pearl Harbor merely triggered the gun loading of previous 2 decades, or more correctly, of the anti-Japanese movement that spanned the entire range of a people's history from plantation to concentration camp. And it was during these next 48 hours, this person says, because they authorized to have to go on this day. And during the next 40 hours, he witnessed the unscrupulous vultures in the form of human beings taking advantage of bewildered housewives whose husbands had been rounded up. They were often pittances for their belongings. My wife's family used to own a farm in Palo Alto, where Facebook is headquartered. You know how much that'd be worth now? Billions. Gone. Gone. Just had to go. Had to sell it for nothing. And then they were taken to these, they never called them concentration camps, they called them internment camps. Different phrase, same thing. So when I look at my wife's family, and she's called Aiko, and her sister's called Midori, and then her mom's called Joan, and her uncles are called Dean, Glenn, and Mark. You see, her grandparents went to the internment camps during the war. Then after the war, they went to Hawaii because there was a lot more Japanese there. But when they grew up in their home, they didn't speak Japanese. They didn't teach their children it. And they didn't give them Japanese names. Why? Because they didn't want to kind of be associated with that side, or wanted to minimize that part of their identity and assimilate into society as best they could. My wife grew up, though, in the 80s. Things had changed. It was okay to have Japanese names. My wife speaks more Japanese than her mother does. Times have changed. Where do I come from? If you have a Bible, turn, if you would, to where we had our scripture reading. You know, the big 3 questions of life are: where do I come from? Where am I going? And why am I here? All of these 3 questions are inextricably connected to each other. Our past, where we come from; why am I here, the present; and where am I going, the future. All of them are connected together. And we have this idea of we're going to this place or this destination here, but unless we really know where we've come from, the 2 of them will be disconnected. We need to know who we are to give us a sense of purpose in the present and to guide us as to where we are going in our journey. The past, the present, and the future are interconnected. Where do I come from? Why am I here? And where am I going? They are all connected together. In the Bible, in the book of Revelation, some of you I'm sure have studied, there are 3 chapters that are very, very, very important for us as Seventh-day Adventists to understand. I'm not going to go into detail under these, but these 3 chapters that are very important for us to understand, and I would encourage all of you to have a good working knowledge of these chapters, is Revelation 10, Revelation 12, and Revelation chapter 14. In Revelation chapter 10, we have Revelation chapter 10 is a chapter in the Bible that gives us a sense of our historical characteristics and who we are as a people. And I believe all Seventh-day Adventists should be able to clearly explain our identity, historical prophetic identity from Revelation chapter 10. And then we have Revelation 14. Revelation 14 talks about the characteristics of God's people, and Revelation 12 talks about Revelation 12 talks about the characteristics, and Revelation 14 talks about the message. All of these chapters are very, very important. Revelation 10, the historical experience. Revelation 12, the characteristics. It's in Revelation 12 where it tells us that the people of God keep the commandments of God. It tells us they have the testimony of Jesus. It gives us the geographical identity. It gives us the time frame of when the church arises. You find all that in Revelation 12. In Revelation 14, you have the three angels' message, and it gives you the outline as to what the message that they believe is. Revelation 10, though, gives us the historical experience as to what God's people went through in the early years of our church. Where do I come from? Understanding the historical experience of our pioneers helps to explain who we are today as a people. You know, when I think about where we come from, and I think about our identity, actually don't turn to Esther, turn to Genesis. And in Genesis, I want to do a contrast today, actually, between two characters in the Bible. A contrast between two characters. Two stories, and contrast them. Compare and contrast. Some of us are very proud of our identity ethnically. Very proud. What countries do we have here in this room? Australia? China? Vietnam? Philippines? Italian? Malaysia? Now, for the Italians, the Malaysians, the Chinese, the Filipinos, the Vietnamese, the Australians, and I think I got them all. Thailand. Tell me the name of the country that in your country, I'm not saying you, but I'm saying stereotypically in your country, which country do the people in your country not like? Japanese, okay. French. Who French? Who French? The Italians and the French? Okay. Italians, French, okay. Where are you from? You're Serbian. Oh, wow. You married each other. Serbia, Croatia, yeah. China and where? Vietnamese and who? Maybe you love everyone, I don't know. But generally speaking, most countries have another country that they don't like. And if you're talking to someone from that country and you ask them, do you come from, and you name the other country, it doesn't go down well. You said Japanese. If you talk to the Japanese, they'll say the Chinese. And it just goes, every country has a country. Now, oftentimes, when it comes to our national identity, we're very proud. Very proud. The Serbians are proud of being Serbian. The Croatians are proud of being Croatian. The Italians are proud of their history, and the French are proud of their history. How much more should we be, I don't know if proud is the right word, how much more should we be confident about our spiritual identity? About our spiritual heritage? If we're proud of a passport, if we're proud of a flag, if we're proud of our national food, how much more should we be proud of, or confident, or sure about our spiritual heritage and identity? When we're asked about what our belief is, or what our spiritual identity is, that we don't beat around the bush, but we know clearly, without a shadow of a doubt, who we are and what we believe. In Genesis chapters 39 to 40, seems my slides have stopped for some reason. In Genesis 39 to 40, or 37 to 45 rather, there's the story of one of my favorite Bible characters. His name is Joseph. Now I'm just going to brush over huge parts of the story, but in Genesis 37 to 45, you've got the story of Joseph. Joseph is a favorite son in the house. In his household, there's 12 sons from 4 different women. Not a good recipe for family happiness. And he and his brother are the sons of the favorite wife. So he has children from the first wife, then the first wife's handmaid, then the second wife's handmaid, and then finally the second wife has 2 sons, Joseph and Benjamin, and they are his favorite. And Joseph grows up as the favorite son there. He grows up as the favorite child, and he gets the coat of many colors. You probably have read that story. And he gets his coat of many colors, and they're so proud. He's so proud of his son, Jacob. His brothers don't like it. He has a dream, and he tells his brothers that one day they're going to bow down to him. His brothers are like, what are you talking about? Then there comes a day when his father says, you need to go to your brothers and take some food to your brothers. And he gets packed up his food, and he gets his coat of many colors, and he goes to see his brothers. And when they see him coming, they grab him, they take the coat of many colors off him, and they throw him into a pit. Then they see the Ishmaelites, I think it is, go by. Then they sell Joseph to them. Then they go down into Egypt and they sell Joseph to Potiphar. And he grows up there in Potiphar. He's about the age of 17 here. And there he is in Potiphar's house. And he has all types of temptations in front of him. And Joseph, we are told, prospers and does well. Genesis 37. Joseph makes a decision. He makes a decision on his way down to Egypt. Ellen White tells us that on his journey down to Egypt, he could see his father's tents on the hills in the distance. And while he was going down there to Egypt, at the age of 17 or 18, typically an age that many of us leave home, university or things like that. At this age of 17 or 18, he sees his father's tents in the distance. He's going to a new country. He hasn't decided to go there. He's forced to go there. And as he's on his way to this new place, he has a decision to make. And the decision is, who is he going to be? Who's he going to be? What identity is he going to assume in the new location where he goes to? And we get clues as to what he decides, because in Genesis 37, when Potiphar's wife comes to him and says, lie with me, what does he say? No. How can I do this and sin against my God? Then the Bible tells us she comes to him every single day, and he says, no, no, no. We get a clue as to what he decides on that camel ride down to Egypt based on the decisions he makes later on when he says, I cannot do this. Joseph says, I come from my father's tents. I come from my father's family. That's where I come from, but that is still who I am here in this strange and foreign land. I understand my spiritual heritage, my spiritual identity, and it still forms a part of who I am here in this new place. In Esther chapter 2, verse 10, we'll come back to Genesis. In Esther chapter 2, verse 10, in Esther chapter 2, verse 10, we have the story of Esther. Now, Esther, like Joseph, was also an exile. Joseph is an exile by force. Esther is living during the time of the Persian Empire. So it was during the Babylonians when they came in 605 BC, and they took first batch of Jews from Jerusalem to Babylon. And then later on they went and took more, and then they took more. In 538, the empire of the world transfers from Babylon to Medo-Persia. Esther is now living during the time of the Medo-Persian, or as it became known later on more as the Persian Empire, which became stronger. She's living during the time of the Medo-Persian Empire. She's living in the modern day country of Iran, Shushan. She's around that area. Now Esther was one of the Jewish exiles. They have moved there. They have the opportunity to return back to their home because there were decrees to say you can go back home, but some of the Jews still stayed there. In fact, they say one of the oldest Jewish communities in the world today is still the small and declining Jewish community in the city of Tehran, Iran today. It's been there for 2,500 years. Esther was there living as an exile when this thing happens in the nation where the king, in chapter 1, he doesn't like his wife. In summary, he gets rid of his wife. And now he has to find a new wife. So what does he do? He says, bring the fair ladies before me, and they have this audition process as to how to find a new wife. And Mordecai tells Esther, you need to go and be part of this audition process with the king. Which, if you read the audition process, it was a lot more detailed than the Bible Friends story makes out, where they stood before the king and he just picked out the pretty one. But be that as it may, the point is this. Esther 2 verse 10, as we read in our scripture reading, what does the king, Mordecai, tell Esther when she goes into the king? It says, Esther had not showed her people nor her what? Kindred, for Mordecai had charged her that she should what? Mordecai charged her that she should not show it. Here at the beginning of Esther's royal reign, today or tomorrow, depends what country you're in, Great Britain or the United Kingdom will get a new monarch. Coronation of King Charles III. Here at the very beginning of Queen Esther's marriage to become queen, she's told by her uncle, don't tell anyone that you are a Jew. You could say, some say, that Esther was there living in Persia and hadn't gone home, which already indicates that she's maybe a backslidden Jew, because the real zealous ones went home back to Jerusalem as soon as they could. And the ones that, were comfortable where they stayed there in Babylon and Medo-Persia, they stayed there. And Esther stayed there, and now she's in this audition, and she gets chosen to be queen, and Mordecai, her uncle, says, don't tell anyone that you're a Jew. Don't tell anybody. Don't tell anybody. What was this part of? Was this part of a grand plan? Or was this just them and her family and her uncle not being confident, proud, assured as to who they were? I personally don't think it's part of a grand strategy to later reveal herself, but really it's just part of her life as being not confident, not sure, not open about who she is. How many of you have been in a work environment where you've had to ask for Sabbath privileges, as they're sometimes called? In the winter, you need to get off work early, or you don't work on sundown Friday to sundown Saturday. And in those situations, it's always best to be upfront with your boss in the interview process than later on. I just need to let you know right now that I can't work from this time to this time during the week. That's who I am. And if you hire me, you're hiring me understanding that at the very beginning. If you don't do it then, and then you wait until wintertime when sunset's getting early, oh, by the way, something I should have told you earlier, it just gets a lot more difficult to bring it up when you're further into the process of employment than it does at the beginning. They'll say, why didn't you tell me at the start? Why didn't you tell me back then? Esther, though, here is just like, don't tell anyone you're a Jew. Don't tell anyone you're a Jew. She's being this, like, not telling anyone. So she gets married to the king, and the king doesn't know he's married a Jew. He doesn't know that Esther's a Hebrew. And then you follow through the story, and you know, a couple of chapters later, maybe by Esther chapter 4, now you've got Haman who wants to kill all the Jews. He wants to wipe them out. And he figures out how much tax they pay, and he figures out all these things, and let's kill them. And now Esther's people, because they know she's a Jew, they come to her and say, Esther, you're one of us. You and us, we're the same people. Our parents are related. We've got kindred. We're the same people. And they say to her, go and do something. Esther chapter 4. Turn to Esther chapter 4. It's interesting because Mordecai is the one who previously says, don't tell anyone you're a Jew. Now Mordecai tells her in Esther chapter 4 and verse 13, he says, then Mordecai commands to answer Esther and says, don't think, I'm summarizing here, don't think that you will escape in the king's house more than all the other Jews. Don't think just because you're living there you'll get away with it. Like, he's going to find out, but it's interesting because he's the one that told her not to say anything. But then verse 14, for if you altogether hold your peace at this time, then shall their enlargement and deliverance arise to the Jews from another place, but you and your father's house shall be destroyed. For who knows whether you'll come to the kingdom for such a time as this. Listen, this may be why you are here. Esther then says those famous words in verse 16, where she says, go gather together all the Jews that are present in Shushan and fast for me. Don't eat for 3 days, day or night, and I and my maidens will fast likewise, and so will I go unto the king, which is according to the law, which is not according to the law, and if I perish, I perish. Esther now comes to this point where she says, okay, I will show who I am, and if I perish, I perish. It would have been a lot easier for her to show herself at the beginning. Esther is an example of someone who's not proud of their identity at the start, but they later gain courage and they're able to have confidence in who they are and be sure about who they are later on. And God has mercy on their, whatever we want to say, their lack of confidence in their identity at the beginning, and God is merciful later on. When I think about the Reformation, I think of two people that come to mind. One of them was by the name of Jerome, and Jerome was a Jerome of Prague. He goes down to try and help his friend out, Huss, in the city of Constance, to try and rescue him, but he realizes he can't rescue him. This is in the early 1300s. He realizes he can't rescue him, so he tries to go back to Prague, but then he gets captured and brought back to Constance himself. And he gets thrown in prison, and he's there in prison, and Jerome who we hold up as one of these great reformers, Jerome actually capitulates and he compromises and he says, okay, I will deny all the faith that I previously had. Thank you. And he stays in jail for another year after he's capitulated, and then later, after a year in jail, he once again regains his confidence and his trust in his beliefs, and he stands firm with who he is. Esther forgets who she is, willingly hides who she is, and then now at the end, she's confident in who she is. Joseph, on the other hand, on his way down to Egypt, as he can see his father's tent in the distance, while he's sitting on that camel, Joseph makes a decision that I am going to be true to my father's faith, to my father's belief, to the God of my fathers. I'm going to be true to that, and I'm going to take that as my identity when I go down there to Egypt. In the workplace, it's always easier to be a Joseph than an Esther. If you're a student, you're at a university campus, it's always easier to be a Joseph than an Esther. Esther's there as an encouragement to many of us who are a little bit weak. And we try and just get by. And I think her story is there as an encouragement to us that even if you start the journey of sharing your faith in a really weak and watered down way, God can still use you when you regain courage. But it's always better to be a Joseph rather than an Esther. Joseph was sure who he was in Potiphar's house. Joseph goes to prison. He's sure in who he is. Joseph gets taken out of prison and he interprets Pharaoh's dreams and he's sure of who he is. Joseph then gets made the prime minister of Egypt and Joseph is sure in who he is. Joseph's brothers come to Egypt and they bow down before him just like the dream said. And Joseph stands in front of his brothers and he identifies himself because he's got a different haircut now. They've given him a new name. And they identifies himself to his brothers and he says, I am Joseph. And he's sure of who he is. Are you a Joseph? Or are you an Esther? They say history is inextricably linked to identity. Who you are today is linked to where you come from. Inextricably linked. If you don't know your history, if you don't know your family, then who are you? They're linked. They're tied together. You know, I was in England, we were filming some lineage and we went to this place called Wesley House. It's in Cambridge. And it's where they train Methodist ministers. Kind of like the seminary, like the Avondale or the Andrews University. And we were there and we just walked in, myself and Clive, the videographer, was asking them questions. And the lady is talking to us and she's going through some stuff and she was mentioning about the Methodist Church and she's like, oh, you know, Methodist Church. And she just said something that caught my attention, but I wasn't quite sure if she really said it. And she said, oh, Methodist, and then she said America, and she said John Wesley, and she said America. And I said, could you just repeat what you said there? Where did you say John Wesley's from? And she said to me, she works here at Wesley House. Oh, John Wesley's from America. I said, did you just say John Wesley from America? Oh, yeah, John Wesley from America. And I said, where did the Methodist Church start? Oh, the Methodist Church started in America. For those of you that don't know, John Wesley is from Yorkshire, England, and the Methodist Church started in England. But she saw fit to inform me that the Methodist Church was from America, as was John Wesley. Now, I know America likes to claim a lot of things that aren't theirs, but you can't just steal churches and reformers and people like that. And I'm like, we're here at a place that trains Methodist ministers, and the lady working at the desk doesn't even know where the church started that she's working for. Where do you come from? As a Seventh-day Adventist today, it's important for us to understand our shared collective heritage, where we as a people come from collectively. Because where we come from collectively forms a part of who we are today, and it should guide where we as a people are going. Individually, it's important for us to understand who we are individually, that we're sure about our faith in Jesus Christ, that we're sure about our spiritual identity, that we're confident about who we are and why we're here and where we are going. When we look at our spiritual history, we can see that over the last 2,000 years, the church has gone through many different phases. The church has gone from being a Middle Eastern to a European to a worldwide Christian faith. The church has gone from being persecuted to illegal to popular to institutional to indifferent. Indifferent today. In some places, going back to being persecuted. Knowing who we are and knowing our identity is key in the different phases or whatever country you're living in or whatever phase it might be. God has given to us a message, and it's important for us to understand our message, and it's important for us to be able to coherently explain our message, and it's important for us to know who we are, why we're here, and where we're going. I would encourage you, as I mentioned at the beginning, to know these different chapters of the Bible, what they relate to, our historical experience, our characteristics, and our message, that help us to explain where we come from, why we're here, and where we're going. Revelation 10, Revelation 12, and Revelation 14. 3 of the most important chapters in the book of Revelation. Joseph, Esther. Joseph accepted his identity and was sure of it. Esther hid hers and later regained it. I would propose to you it's better to be a Joseph than an Esther, and for us to be sure of who we are in Christ today. May God give us that strength and confidence in our spiritual identity. Amen.